Hello and welcome to the show. Thank you so much for watching. Is the FBI being weaponized against the American people? Yesterday, Attorney General Merrick Garland sat in a Senate Judiciary Committee hearing where he was questioned on a variety of subjects such as the Hunter Biden investigation, the safety of Supreme Court justices, angry parents at school board meetings, amongst other topics. One line of questioning by Senator Josh Hawley took an interesting turn. He focused on the FBI being weaponized against Catholics. Let's watch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Attorney General Garland, let me just ask you, does your department have a problem with anti-Catholic bias?
Our department protects all religions and all ideologies. It does not have any bias against any religion of any kind.
Well, you could have surprised me, because given the resources that you are expending and the apparently intelligence assets that you are deploying against Catholics, it appears, and other people of faith, while simultaneously turning a blind eye while people are executed gang style on the streets of our cities, including in my home state, your answer frankly surprises me. Let's talk about the Mark Houck case, for example. You've been asked about this already today, and frankly, your answers really astound me. This is a case where a Catholic pro-life demonstrator, father, was accused of disorderly conduct in front of an abortion center. The local prosecutor, the Philadelphia district attorney, who is a Democrat, a liberal, very progressive, declined to prosecute. There was a private suit that got dismissed. And then after all of that, your Justice Department sent between 20 and 30 armed agents in the early morning hours to the Houck's private residence to arrest this guy after he had offered to turn himself in voluntarily. Here's the photo. Once again, you can see the long guns, you can see the ballistic shields, you can see that they're wearing bulletproof vests. Why did the Justice Department do this? Why did you send 20 to 30 SWAT-style agents and a SWAT-style team to this guy's house when everybody else had declined to prosecute and he'd offered to turn himself in?
Determinations of how to make arrests under arrest warrants are made based by the tactical operators in the district. They are not.
But you surely looked into it by this point, right? You know the answer. Surely.
All I know is what the FBI has said, which is that they made decisions on the ground as to what was safest and easiest. So they do not agree with your description of what happened on the scene.
You don't agree with my description. I'm pointing out what the photo is. There are agents here who have long guns and ballistic shields. Let's take a look at the hardened criminals that your Justice Department sent these armed agents to go terrorize on that morning. Here they are. Here they are at Mass. Here's the 7 children with Mr. Houck and his wife. In this early morning, they were all at home. Mrs. Houck has said repeatedly the children were screaming. They feared for their lives. You got these agents demanding that he come out. They've got the guns, she said, pointing at the house and at them. He has offered to turn himself in. And this is who you go to terrorize. What's really interesting to me is this seems to directly contradict your own memorandum about the use of force at the Justice Department. You say officers may use only the force that is objectively reasonable to effectively control an incident. Are you telling me that in your opinion as Attorney General, it was objectively necessary to use 20 or 30 SWAT-style agents with long guns and ballistic shields for these people?
What I'm saying is that decisions about how to go about this were made on the ground by FBI agents.
So you're saying you don't know?
I'm saying what I just said.
Which is that you're abdicating responsibility?
I'm not abdicating responsibility.
Then give me the answer. Do you think, in your opinion, you are the Attorney General of the United States, you are in charge of the Justice Department, and yes, sir, you are responsible. So give me an answer.
The FBI does not agree with your description.
I'm not asking about the FBI. You are the Attorney General. Give me your answer. Do you think that it was objectively reasonable and they followed your guidelines in sending 20 to 30 armed agents to terrorize these people? Yes or no?
The facts I have, which are those presented by the FBI, are not consistent with your description.
So you think it was reasonable?
I'm saying the facts are not as you describe.
What, that the children weren't there? That there weren't long guns there? That there weren't agents? What do you dispute? What's the factual premise you dispute?
FBI
Be specific.
Said they don't agree with your description of...
Be specific. They don't agree with what?
Of how many agents, of the agents who were there, and of what their roles were. They don't agree.
Do you know the jury in this case acquitted Mr. Houck? I'm sure you're aware. Do you know how long it took him?
I am aware, and we respect the decision of the jury.
Do you know how long it took him?
I don't know.
1 hour. 1 hour. Philadelphia District Attorney declines to prosecute. The private suit's dismissed. You use an unbelievable show of force with guns that I just note liberals usually decry. We're supposed to hate long guns and assault-style weapons. You're happy to deploy them against Catholics and innocent children. Happy to. And then you haul him into court and a jury acquits him in 1 hour. I just suggest to you that that is a disgraceful performance by your Justice Department and a disgraceful use of resources. I notice a pattern, though. The FBI field office in Richmond on the 23rd of January of this year issued a memorandum in which they advocated for, and I quote, the exploration of new avenues for tripwire and source development against traditionalist Catholics, it's their language, including those who favor the Latin Mass. Attorney General, are you cultivating sources and spies in Latin Mass parishes and other Catholic parishes around the country?
No, the Justice Department does not do that. It does not do investigations based on religion. I saw the document you have.
What did you do about it?
It's appalling. It's appalling. I'm in complete agreement with you. I understand that the FBI has withdrawn it, and it's now looking into how this could ever have happened.
How did it happen?
That's what they're looking into. But I'm totally in agreement with you. That document is appalling.
I'll tell you how it happened. This memorandum, which is supposed to be intelligent, cites extensively the Southern Poverty Law Center, which goes on to identify all of these different Catholics as being part of hate groups. Is this how the FBI, under your direction and leadership, is this how they do their intelligence work? They look at left-wing advocacy groups to target Catholics? Is this what's going on? I mean, clearly it is. How is this happening?
The FBI is not targeting Catholics, and as I've said, this is an inappropriate memorandum, and it doesn't reflect the methods that the FBI is supposed to be using. It should not be relying on any single organization without doing its own work.
Let me just ask you, as my time expires here, a very direct question. How many informants do you have in Catholic churches across America?
I don't know, and I don't believe we have any informants aimed at Catholic churches. We have a rule against investigations based on First Amendment activity, and Catholic churches are obviously First Amendment activity. But I don't know a specific answer to your question.
You don't know the specifics of anything, it seems, but apparently on your watch, this Justice Department is targeting Catholics, targeting people of faith, specifically for their faith views. And Mr. Attorney General, I'll just say to you, it's a disgrace.
Here with us now is FBI whistleblower Steve Friend. Steve witnessed unjust January 6th investigations and sounded the alarm, causing his career to careen off track. Steve, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
So, you know, there is this seemingly shift in direction when it comes to the war on terror. This is kind of what we've seen now, is that the war on terror seems to have come home. And now the FBI seems to be investigating American citizens, whether they be Catholics, apparently, you know, pro-life Catholics, angry parents at school board meetings who've been called potential terrorists. January 6th, you were involved in that. You blew the whistle in that regard with the FBI. So it just seems like they're going after people for their various different political or religious or moral viewpoints. What is the agenda? Who is controlling this? Is it Merrick Garland? Is it these, you know, Democrats? Is it really just conservatives who are being targeted? What do you think is the bigger agenda here?
I think the ultimate agenda is something that is called the integrated program management process that the FBI uses to essentially budget its performance for every fiscal year. And that can range from everything you can think of to opening up a certain number of cases in a particular violation to generating a certain number of intelligence products. And that it is essentially combining Minority Report and Moneyball together. And unfortunately, people are people, and it's very tempting to work smarter, not harder. So there's a lot of pressure to meet these metrics and these numbers, and people want to show that they've exceeded in their performance. And they're always just on the lookout for the next intelligence report that they can make, or the next case that they can open. And the righteousness of that intelligence product or the righteousness of that prosecution is thrown by the wayside, especially when these IPM, integrated program management processes, are tied to compensation for the highest ranking members in the FBI.
So you're almost saying that it's like what many of us think happens with police officers, that there's a quota, they have to give a certain number of tickets by the end of the month or else, and they want to meet that. So you're saying that the FBI operates under a similar sort of circumstance, that they have to meet some sort of quota?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And it's really borne itself out to be quite negative for the population at large, especially when it comes to domestic terrorism, because fortunately for us as human beings, the domestic terror presence in this country is not that high. Unfortunately, though, the political whirlwinds and this IPM, the demand for domestic terrorism cases to be in place vastly outstrips the supply. So now there's a lot of pressure to open up cases on individuals, which is essentially what we saw with January 6th, where one case was turned into thousands of cases.
Yeah, so does this shift depending on who's in the administration? So if you have a conservative administration, do they target people that are more liberal? And if you have a liberal administration, they target more conservatives? Is it based on the political ideology of the administration and the attorney general?
In theory, you would think that, but in my experience, I think that the conservative administrations tend to be the Bill Barr types that want to bang their chest and say that we don't use the government as a weapon and there's no tit for tat. But then the next administration comes in the form of Merrick Garland, who was one of Barack Obama's appointees to the Supreme Court. He is a far left ideologue, and that plumb line for that worldview is to use the forces and the metrics within the government to reward your friends and punish your enemies. And that's what's going on now.
It seems to me, though, that it would be just a difference in who they attack. So if it's conservatives, for example, it seems like, a lot of the people that they would go after, maybe not political ideology, because I do feel like liberals today, the Democrats today, do believe that anyone who's a conservative, if they are a religious conservative or they voted for Trump, that they are, basically a fascist who's going to march us towards a Nazi government sort of thing. That, they have that sort of ideology. But on the conservative side, it's more about, we're going to stop the criminals, the drug dealers, all these bad people doing bad things, but they maybe target people that aren't, maybe they're just migrants, but they're not criminal migrants. They're not criminals themselves doing a bunch of. So did you see a shift in the direction in that way? Because it seems like that's what a conservative administration would. Or really, how much control does an administration even have over the FBI? Are they given the directives?
Yes. So I was in a position where I was assigned to work child pornography investigations and moved off of that into domestic terrorism investigations. And when I asked about what was going to happen with the cases that I was working, I was told they were no longer going to be resourced by the FBI. That was no longer going to be a priority.
Wow, that's interesting, because that's exactly what conservatives are claiming. I mean, they claim that liberals, that Democrats don't care about children, child trafficking or child porn, that they're kind of turning a blind eye to what's happening and instead focusing in on these, the domestic terrorists of these parents, these angry parents at these school board meetings, or January 6th, that's a big one. Russia, right? They're thinking that everybody's a Russian asset. So you're telling me that is true, that when you were at the FBI, they really did pull you off of those cases and move you. Did they assign someone else in your place?
No, they did not. And there was actually, I worked in a small office that was sort of a satellite. And my headquarters, which was in Jacksonville, had an entire squad assigned to work child pornography. That squad was broken down and no longer resourced towards child pornography investigations. Now, that's anecdotal. That's one particular field office, but I think it's probably indicative of a larger problem that's bureau-wide. But and this is something I've sort of gone back and forth on recently and mulling over my head. I think there's a case to be made that the FBI is sort of extra constitutional to begin with in its origins, And back in the days, in the 40s and the 50s and 60s, when everybody was anti-communist, the FBI's job was to preserve the continuity of government and the status quo. So they went after communists, and everybody was very happy. Well, now the status quo is a leftist administration. So the FBI is now a tool of that. And now that's why we're seeing where half the country is being labeled as terrorists or a threat to democracy. And the FBI is really the tool, the arm of enforcement.
Yeah, so tell us about your experience and how you became a whistleblower. So you were investigating people that were involved or even just they were accused of being involved with January 6th?
That's correct. I brought a lot of experience to it. I'd seen a lot of cases in my prior service in violent crimes. And when I looked at the January 6th cases, when I was reassigned, I realized that the FBI is disregarding its rules, its guidelines for carrying these investigations forward. When I dug into that, it became very apparent that they took one case, which was January 6th, and instead of opening up one, they opened up separate cases for each person and then spread those cases to the field as opposed to running them from Washington, D.C. to create the illusion that domestic terrorism is on the rise nationwide when all the numbers are in fact derivative from January 6th. And then I also saw that the process becoming the punishment for many of these subjects. These were people who they might have been accused of doing something that was pretty reprehensible, but they had pledged to be cooperative with the FBI. And instead of calling them or contacting their attorney and asking them to surrender if they were charged with a crime, we were sending SWAT teams or large-scale arrest operations to their houses. And I thought that was an unnecessary risk to the public safety. And I had experience on that. I was a SWAT operator for 5 years.
Wow. So what types of people were they sending you to go and investigate for January 6th? I know that in one of the cases, one of the stories you've told is that the person wasn't even there, and yet they were forcing you to knock on their door.
Yes. It was an anonymous tip. There was no indication that this gentleman had been at the Capitol. His phone did not come up in the geofence. His facial recognition did not ping positive. But it was all based on an anonymous tip, and I was told that that was enough to go and knock on his door, even though a prosecution would be very difficult. And when I knocked on his door, he told me he was not, in fact, at the Capitol because that was the day of his son's funeral.
An anonymous tip will get an FBI agent to knock on your door without any other evidence. So then you become, what else? So I would imagine a knock on the door is not the only thing that happens to you, but I would imagine you end up under investigation.
Yes, and that happens all the time for a wide range of things, not just January 6th. We're just now seeing this being exposed more so because the scale of that case is so large, and because the hunger for domestic terrorism cases is so great. We're seeing it really bear its ugly teeth at us. But I've had the experience of interacting with somebody who was a little bit mentally challenged. And when I went to go close out that investigation, was pressured to open up an ISIS investigation on them because there wasn't an ISIS investigation for my division. And we had to check the box on that and make sure that we had at least one of those cases open.
What happens if society just suddenly, there is no crime, there's no bad people, no one's doing anything wrong, we're just living in like this utopia? What would happen then? I mean, so you're saying that again, this quota is like, oh, well, then investigate this guy for ISIS just because you don't have one. This quota, it leads to, I would imagine, a lot of times false convictions or false charges. I mean, how often does that happen?
I think that there's lots of examples, especially in the national security side, and we saw that with the Wolverine Watchman in Michigan, with the kidnapping plot against Gretchen Whitmer, where you saw these guys who were not predisposed to commit a crime, but resources were used, undercovers and informants, to pressure these individuals to taking some sort of initial step that they could come down on them with these charges that, when the trial came about, it was very clear that those guys were entrapped. So this is a process that needs to be looked at. And I think really it's all derivative of the IPM process, plus the fact that the FBI has now evolved from a law enforcement agency with a tactical intelligence component to an intelligence gathering agency with some law enforcement capacity.
It's like domestic CIA, is what you're saying, that the FBI has converted itself into.
Yes. I mean, it's across the board. There were always continuous requests for collection from intelligence analysts, and these intelligence analysts weren't even FBI personnel. They were from the ODNI, and they would task agents with performing tasks that were not really related to the casework that we were doing. And we were, in fact, just gathering information about American citizens so that we could draft these reports, put them into a database somewhere. So there's a fairly good chance that there are a lot of people out there who have open FBI intelligence investigations or reports that they're in, and they're completely unaware of it.
I think my big concern, because what we saw with that Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping plot was that the people that they roped into getting involved, a lot of times people are not mentally, they're not mentally sound 100%. So they're able to easily talk people into doing things who are, and that's what we always see whenever we do see some sort of big event. Oftentimes when that person is then brought to courts or investigated, it's found that that person is mentally ill in some way. And so there is this, if the FBI has this quota and they're just, and so then they're investigating people and then even entrapping them a bit by saying, okay, well, we're going to infiltrate the group. We're going to then talk about kidnapping Gretchen Whitmer, and then we're going to see how many people fall for it, right? And then they know the people that are falling for it are the people that are not mentally fully at their best capacity. And so they're able to rope them into it. It just makes me worried that a lot of the people who are sitting in jails right now are those very people who were basically roped in by the government. It's almost like it's like a Minority Report. They're looking for the people that they think would have the propensity to do a crime. And so they put a crime in front of them and bait them into it, talk them into it, make them feel confident in it, and then get them to say, okay. And then see, we got the criminal. I mean, is that what you're saying is sort of happening?
Yes, that is what is happening. And the origin for that might be an honest attempt to prevent something bad from happening. I think you can make the case that national security in this country since September 11th transitioned from we're going to preserve the Constitution, we're going to preserve the continuity government, to September 11th happens, and then you have the Patriot Act come out, and the goal now becomes no American shall die at the hands of a terrorist. And unfortunately, in a free society, that's an impossible goal to achieve. You cannot have security and freedom simultaneously. So the FBI is now looking for ghosts. And if they have to justify their existence, they have to justify the excess compensation that a lot of the management receives for meeting these metrics. And there's always pressure to hit those numbers. And unfortunately now it's become part of the criminal world, investigation world too, not just national security. I've sat in and heard discussions about using sophisticated investigative techniques that aren't necessary just because we have to say that we use them.
Oh, geez. I mean, we've got to figure out a way to unravel it. It's just like the CIA. I mean, at this point, there's so much evidence against the CIA. It's just time to get rid of that organization. That department has got to go. They've done too much. And there's too much questioning about what the CIA has really been up to over the years. And it sounds like that's happening. The same sort of thing is happening with the FBI. I mean, clearly we do need law enforcement. I'm not saying we need to abolish police. And FBI is essentially a police force, a federal police force. But it certainly needs to be scaled back. And certainly I think lawmakers like Josh Hawley and others need to be questioning the quota issue. That seems to be what is really driving this, as you're saying, is this quota issue. People, good people, trying to do their job, just are trying to then check the boxes. Oh, the job says I got to do this, so I got to do this. And they're just trying to hold on to their jobs. And so that sounds like that is really, truly the kind of the crux of the issue, is that we got to get rid of the quota. Same thing with cops, by the way, like just beat cops. Like nobody wants to get their, a ticket just because it's like the 30th of the month. All that's just got to go away, right? Yeah. Steve,
yes,
thank you so much.
And I understand wanting.
Go ahead.
No, I said I understand wanting to perform well, but I think there needs to be a reconsideration and a redefinition of what is successful. And that's something that hopefully this select committee and under the judiciary is going to look at.
Yeah. Steve, tell us real quickly about your book that's coming out, True Blue. What is this about?
It's a personal memoir of my experience as a police officer and as an FBI agent, and talked about some of the great experiences that I got to have within the Bureau and as a police officer, and then get into the details of my whistleblower complaint about January 6th.
And all right, so then we will definitely, we have the link there. So thank you so much, Steve Friend. Thank you for joining the show.
Thank you.
Well, I want to tell you guys about a product I've been using. It's called Field of Greens. It's a great way to get all of your fruits and vegetables into your diet. It's a simple powder. You just mix it into your drink or you sprinkle it onto your food. And what makes Field of Greens different is it's not made with any extracts. It's actually made with real, freeze-dried, organic fruits and vegetables. And if you're like me, it's difficult to get all of your fruits and veggies in, especially if you're doing something like intermittent fasting or you just like junk food. Field of Greens is a great way to get those nutrients in, which honestly for me has helped me feel less hungry between meals and crave less junk food because my body has the nutrition it needs. So one way I like to use it is by mixing it into my morning chocolate protein shake. And that actually makes my shake taste a little fruity, sort of like raspberry chocolate. It's pretty good. So head to fieldofgreens.com, use the promo code Kim to get 15% off your first order.